What's up YouTube, Capital G here. Today we're going to be discussing one of the best 2 tribute Yu-Gi-Oh monsters of all time, and really a GX icon, Light and Darkness Dragon. We'll be covering its surge to dominance and why it eventually fell off the face of the planet. We'll also be talking about the potential of it becoming meta again. With all that out of the way, welcome to the rise and fall of Light and Darkness Dragon. Potential showstopper. During the GX era, when social media was still in its infancy, online Yu-Gi-Oh message boards like Pojo and Duelist Grounds were the biggest source of information of the OCG metagame and future powerful cards that were about to be released in the TCG card pool. There were about half a dozen times during this era where the hype for a card reached monumental levels. This was the case with cards like Elemental Hero Stratos, Dark Arm Dragon, and the Gadgets. Light and Darkness Dragon, or Rida as they called it in the OCG, was definitely one of these cases. For many, the hype was pretty hard to believe. For starters, you had to understand Light and Darkness Dragon was a 2 tribute monster and it could only be normal summon. And that unfortunately meant that it was instantly going to be written off by a lot of duelists. Up until that point, you could argue that Dark Magician to Chaos and Great Shogun Sheen were the only real legitimate 2 tribute monsters to see competitive play, and that was only in a handful of decks like Magical Scientist, FTK, Six Samurai, and Diamond Dude Turbo. The key difference between those cards and Lad was the fact that you rarely ever tribute summoned for those cards. Add that to the fact that Lad could also negate your cards and had a mandatory field destruction effect for the player who controlled it, and it's easy to see before it was even released why many people were comparing it to playing Russian roulette. An instant hit. Despite the naysayers, Light and Darkness Dragon came out the gate and absolutely crushed the metagame. Released in early November 2007, at next month's Shonen Jump San Mateo, the Light and Darkness Dragon Perfect Circle Monarch variants completely outclassed the pure variants everyone had become accustomed to. Shonen Jump champions like Adam Korn, Philly Luna, and Jerry Wang all opted to go the Lad route over the pure. This not only led to a Light and Darkness Dragon filled mirror match in the finals of San Mateo, but Light and Darkness Dragon would end up capturing back-to-back championships, which pretty much cemented the power of the card and that it was in fact the better version of the deck. So much power. One of the biggest reasons why the Light and Darkness Dragon version of Perfect Circle was superior to the original and really all the Monarch variants currently in the game was because you didn't need to adjust pretty much anything to the current deck to incorporate Lad. Monarchs already worked well with cards like Destiny Hero Malicious, Treeborn Frog, Enemy Controller, and Soul Exchange. Well, all those cards were really useful for putting Lad on the board as well. During the first half of GX, the game was a lot focused more on control-based strategies and out-resourcing your opponent. Almost every time you did that, you were ensured victory. This is actually one of the biggest reasons why so many one-for-one removal cards like Dimensional Prison and Smashing Ground were so popular back then. The game also lacked a lot of good control boss monsters that could be put on the board and your opponent would have to use multiple resources to get them off, or potentially just lose to it. Lad was really one of the first big behemoth boss monsters to check both boxes. Light and Darkness Dragon had built-in protection to stun your opponent while keeping itself alive on the field at the same time. It could also make your opponent's standalone one-for-one cards pretty terrible, as Lad would just negate them and then live to fight another day. Because Light and Darkness Dragon hit the field at an incredibly respectable 2800 attack, it generally meant that it wasn't going to be anything near weak until he had already negated maybe 3 of your opponent's cards already. Another important factor is there weren't really that many one-card answers to Light and Darkness Dragon. They were extremely limited. Spirit Reaper could be set and you could use it to stall against Light and Darkness Dragon, but that was limited to 1. The same thing goes for Treeborn Frog, which technically could activate its effect to summon itself during the standby phase infinitely, which actually could eat up all of Light and Darkness Dragon's negations, but that card was limited to 1 as well, so your countermeasures to Light and Darkness Dragon in the card pool were extremely limited. Partner in crime. As I said earlier, to incorporate Light and Darkness Dragon into many meta decks, you really didn't have to change a lot, and you got a much higher ceiling from your deck because you had the potential to summon the game's best lockdown stun monster. Light and Darkness Dragon wasn't just good for stunning, but it also increased the utility of one of the most powerful cards in the game, Destiny Hero Disc Commander. Disc Commander was a huge swing of momentum during the GX era when summoned from the graveyard, and before Light and Darkness Dragon, we really only definitely had Premature Burial, Call of the Haunted, and I guess you could say sometimes Destiny Hero Fearmonger could bring it back from the graveyard. Monster Reborn spent the entire 2007 year on the ban list, so that wasn't a very viable option. Reviving a Disc Commander off of Lad's effect not only meant a huge draw too, and a full recovery of the resources that you use for tribute summoning Light and Darkness in the first place, but if your opponent couldn't kill the Disc Commander during that turn, it usually meant they were going to get wrecked by a Monarch, or even worse, another copy of Light and Darkness Dragon during the next turn. This interaction between Disc Commander and Light and Darkness Dragon might seem small, but it added even more utility to a card that already had amazing synergy with some of the best cards in the metagame, hell, some of the best cards during the entire GX era. Cards like Crush Card Virus, Elemental Hero Stratos, and Destiny Draw, just to name a few. In fact, the synergy that Lad had with Disc Commander was actually one of the major reasons that it got banned during the very next year. Derailed. If Light and Darkness Dragon was so dominant when it was released that within one format Konami actually semi-limited the card, what exactly went wrong for it? In my personal opinion, unequivocally the biggest reason why Light and Darkness Dragon fell off the planet, and you rarely if ever saw it during the 5Ds era, was the release of Phantom Darkness. When Phantom Darkness was released, the speed of the game was so astronomically high that a lot of these slower paced Monarch decks simply couldn't keep up. One of the biggest factors was, while Light and Darkness Dragon counted as a dark monster while face up on the field, it was still in fact a light attribute monster in the hand. This meant that it couldn't be used with the new Allure Darkness draw card that had just been released in Phantom Darkness, and this also went for a lot of the Monarchs as a whole. Thestalos, Mobius, and Ryza, they didn't have any natural synergy with the new dark support in the set. If Light and Darkness Dragon had been a dark in the hand, I believe it probably would have saw play, as it would have been a trade-in target as well, and a turn 1 Lad could have meant the opportunity of halting your opponent's entire turn. Phantom Darkness also opened the door for some really degenerate FTKs like the Shadow Priestess of Ohm FTK and Magical Explosion. This meant that players were much more focused on turn 1 and drawing tons of cards. Light and Darkness Dragon could have easily prevented those, but obviously not if you went second. In general, the Dad Return meta was just too fast for Light and Darkness Dragon to be consistently effective, and to make matters worse, just a little bit after the Dad Return meta ended, Disc Commander got banned, which stripped Lad of easily its most valuable targets. 5D's disaster. During the next era, the game became much more focused around the extra deck, and this was actually somewhat of a new concept. During the GX era, while OTK decks like Cyberstein and Demise used their extra deck, it was actually quite common up until the Glad format to go to a premier event like a Regionals or a Shonen Jump and not even have to play one. When we started 5Ds and got Synchros, although some of the Perfect Circle cards like Stratos, Malicious, Destiny Draw, and Phoenix Wing Windblast carried over, people were much more eager to use 2 monsters on the field for a Synchro summon, not some old school tribute monster. This was mainly thanks to Destiny Hero Malicious, meaning that you could easily Synchro summon multiple times for OTKs, which obviously beat the old school grinded out style that benefited Light and Darkness Dragon. Flash in the pan. As improbable as it sounds, Light and Darkness Dragon did actually make a legitimate competitive comeback to the Yu-Gi-Oh meta during the Zexal era. This was all thanks to the Dragon Ruler archetype and the fact that Light and Darkness Dragon was searchable by way of Eclipse Wyvern. For the first time, you had a consistent way of actually searching the dragon, and the rulers were the perfect archetype to put fodder on the board to facilitate the summon. In the mirror match or against Prophecy, it could be absolutely devastating facing down a first turn Lad, as neither deck was really known for having good-sized, normal summonable beat stick monsters that could easily out it. Usually your opponent, just like in the GX era, would have to throw a bunch of cards at it and hope for the best. In fact, this brief comeback for Lad also includes being played in the 2013 Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship winning version of Dragon Rulers. What the future holds. While Light and Darkness Dragon is still a fundamentally solid card in today's game, especially with the Pendulum Summon, which would make it incredibly easy to summon, I think that we need probably 2 of these 3 things to happen before it could ever hope to be meta again. Number 1, a good consistent way of searching it from the deck outside of Eclipse Wyvern, because that relies on you getting Eclipse Wyvern to the graveyard and then banishing it after that. Number 2, a fantastic card to summon back that greatly benefit to your future plays or just as a benefit of being special summoned from the graveyard. Losing Disc Commander seriously hurt Light and Darkness Dragon, and we don't really have any good substitutes. Disc Commander has been errated now, but it's not nearly the card that it used to be before. I don't think anybody will debate that. And finally, number 3, a new dragon or chaos theme archetype that could really make use of this guy. I think that Lad has never really reached its full potential, the fact that it counts as a dark and light monster on the field, and maybe something like that could actually make use of a critical skill that Lad has really never been able to capitalize on. So let me know what you guys thought of this little short Yu-Gi-Oh story on Light and Darkness Dragon. The card has such an interesting history, always been one of my personal favorites because it was used by my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh character of any Yu-Gi-Oh show or anime, that is Manjume Thunder in the manga. And you know, when it came out, it was so dominant and it was like this amazing stun card the game had never seen. And then it was gone so quickly when Phantom Darkness came out and the game just was flipped on its head. Yeah, it was a pretty crazy story. So thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.